I didn't interrupt her. I didn't argue. I didn't ask for clarification. I sat there, steady as a chair leg, and let the moment finish itself. The thing people misunderstand about endings is that they rarely arrive with fireworks. Most of the time, they arrive as a small, clean decision made after 1,000 smaller compromises. For nearly 2 years, I told myself I was being mature. I thought restraint was the same thing as strength. I thought flexibility was the same thing as love. Her name was Marin. We met at a weekend workshop our friend insisted we attend, the kind with sticky notes on the wall and strangers pretending to be brave. She had a laugh that made people turn their heads. She spoke quickly, confidently, as if her thoughts were always one step ahead of the room. I liked that energy. I liked how alive she seemed. In the beginning, she made me feel visible. She asked questions and waited for the answers. She texted good morning and meant it. She held my hand in crowds like she was proud. On our third date, she told me she had a complicated history. She listed a few past partners the way someone lists old injuries. There was always an intense one, a dramatic one, a disappointing one. She said she was done with intensity and wanted calm. She said I felt calm. I took that as a compliment. Over time, calm became my job description. At first, it was little things. Plans moved around without warning. Conversations ended the moment they turned toward my feelings. If I asked for more notice, she called it rigid. If I asked why she seemed distant, she called it pressure. Whenever I tried to name something that bothered me, she'd tilt her head and say, "Don't make it a whole thing." She didn't say it cruelly. She said it casually, like a rule we both knew. So, I learned the rules. I learned what earned a soft smile and what earned a sigh. I learned to swallow disappointment before it became a sentence. The strange part was that I still thought we were fine. I told myself every couple has patterns. I told myself I was lucky she didn't like conflict. I told myself I could carry the calm for both of us. The moment I started to notice the cost was the moment I began to disappear. It showed up in my body before my mind would admit it. My stomach tightened when my phone buzzed. My shoulders rose when she said we need to talk, even if she meant a restaurant order. I started rehearsing responses. I started editing stories so they wouldn't trigger annoyance. I started praising myself for being easy. Then came the promotion. It wasn't a dream job, but it was a real step. I'd spent months closing a contract that had everybody at work tense. When it finally landed, my boss shook my hand like it mattered, because it did. Marin suggested we celebrate. She sent me 3 restaurant options, then changed her mind twice, then insisted we try a new rooftop place downtown. I booked it. I wanted that night to feel simple. She arrived looking amazing, a little late, a little distracted, but smiling. She kissed my cheek and said she was proud of me. For a minute, I relaxed. The rooftop was loud in that city way. Music and clinking glasses and people leaning in close to be heard. We checked in at the host stand and waited near the bar for our table. That's when she froze. It was subtle, but I'd learned her signals. A tiny inhale, a stiffening through the shoulders, a half step forward like gravity had changed. She stared toward the bar, and her face lit up with a brightness I hadn't seen aimed at me in months. A man stood there talking to the bartender like the room belonged to him. He turned and caught her eye and smiled like he'd been expecting this. Marin said his name under her breath. Calder. I knew the name because it had been in our apartment like background noise. Calder was the ex she described as complicated, the one she claimed had taught her what not to tolerate. Her expression didn't match that story. She walked to him before I could decide what to do. He opened his arms. She went into them. It wasn't a polite hello. It was familiarity. I followed because that's what you do when you're part of the evening. I stepped beside her and offered my hand, steady and adult. I said, "I'm Theo, Marin's boyfriend." Calder glanced at my hand the way you glance at a flyer someone is trying to give you. He didn't take it. He looked at Marin instead and said, "Boyfriend, huh?" Like it was a punchline. She laughed. Again, not nervously, easily. Heat rose in my neck, not because of him, because of her. I waited for her to correct the tone, to set a boundary, to include me. Instead, she said we should talk for a second just to clear the air. Then she turned to me and said, "Go find our table. And please don't do that thing where you get tense. Let me handle this." She didn't ask. She assigned. I looked at her, and something in me clicked into place. A quiet, final alignment. I nodded once. I said sure. And I walked toward the host stand. The host smiled and said, "Your table is ready." I looked past him toward the bar. Marin and Calder were already leaning close, laughing at something private. Her hand touched his forearm like it belonged there. I heard my own voice say, "I won't be needing the table." It sounded calm, which surprised me. The host blinked, confused. I apologized, stepped back, and walked to the elevator. I didn't stomp. I didn't make a scene. I didn't even glance behind me to see if she noticed. Outside, the air felt cooler than it should have. I sat in my car and checked the time. 7:42 p.m. I didn't feel like crying. I felt like finishing paperwork. I drove home in silence. No music. Just the hum of the road and the strange relief of not pretending. When I got to the apartment, I didn't wander. I didn't hesitate. I went straight to the closet and pulled out a suitcase. I packed what was mine. The clothes I'd bought with my money. The watch my father gave me. The documents in the drawer she never opened. I avoided shared things on purpose. Not because I was generous, but because I didn't want the story to be about property. I wanted it to be about choice. Then I unplugged the router. The internet bill was in my name. It felt petty, but it also felt accurate. If she wanted to keep a connection alive, she could pay for one. I took my laptop, my hard drives, my camera, my headphones. I left the couch and the plates and the stupid framed print she insisted looked sophisticated. I checked the time again. 8:39 p.m. I wrote a note on a plain index card from the desk drawer. I kept it short because long notes turn into negotiations. I wrote, "I'm not starting anything. I'm ending my participation." I left my key on the counter and locked the door behind me. I drove to a small hotel across town, checked in under my name, and bought a bottle of water from the lobby like I was starting a new routine. My phone lit up on the elevator ride. Her name. I didn't answer. I didn't decline. I just watched it ring until it stopped. The first voicemail arrived 10 minutes later. Her voice was annoyed, not worried. She asked where I'd gone and said the host told her I left. The second voicemail sounded sharper. She complained about being stranded, about the awkwardness, about Calder leaving to meet friends. By the third voicemail, her tone shifted into confusion. She said the apartment was dark, that the Wi-Fi wasn't working, that something felt wrong. The fourth voicemail was crying. Not the performative kind, but the kind that comes from consequences arriving on schedule. I didn't play them right away. I ordered room service, sat on the edge of the bed, and let the quiet settle into my bones. In the morning, there were missed calls and messages stacked like a bad debt. I read only enough to confirm what I already knew. She was angry that I had acted without her permission. That was the final proof. I emailed the landlord that day and asked about removing my name from the lease. I kept my message brief. I wasn't requesting a conversation. I was documenting a transition. Marin showed up in my inbox with long paragraphs that swung between apology and accusation. She said I embarrassed her. She said I overreacted. She said she had only needed closure. The word closure made me laugh once, quietly, in my hotel room. Closure is what you seek when a story ends. She was trying to keep the story open while assigning me the role of background support. I responded with one sentence. I said I'm not available for a relationship that requires me to be managed. Then I stopped replying. The next few weeks were mostly logistics. I moved into a smaller place near my office. I bought the cheapest furniture that didn't wobble. I slept deeper than I had in a year. People think leaving means you feel empty. What I felt was space. Space to think without anticipating correction. Space to speak without calculating. Marin's friends reached out. One called me cruel. Another said she was suffering. A third said adults talk things out. I didn't debate. I didn't explain. I simply declined to be recruited into their version of the story. A month later, the landlord emailed about unpaid rent. I forwarded it to Marin and reminded her I had paid my portion through the date we agreed on. Then I blocked the thread. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that Calder had disappeared the way he always did. He wasn't looking for reconciliation. He was looking for attention. Marin had traded my steady presence for a brief ego boost from a man who didn't even stay for dessert. Time did what time does. The drama cooled. My nervous system stopped bracing. I started enjoying ordinary things again, like groceries and quiet weekends and making coffee without a silent audience. 8 months after the rooftop night, I ran into Marin at a pharmacy near my new apartment. She looked startled to see me, like she'd expected me to remain a ghost that existed only in her complaints. Her hair was pulled back, her face tired, her confidence reduced to a careful smile. She said, "Theo," like my name could reopen the door. I said hi, calmly. Not cold, just neutral. She asked if we could talk, just for a minute. She said she'd been thinking a lot. She said she was sorry. I checked my watch out of habit and then realized I didn't have to. I wasn't late for anything. I wasn't managing anyone's mood anymore. I told her we could walk outside while I waited for my prescription. On the sidewalk, she apologized in a rush, as if speed could make the words more convincing. She said Calder meant nothing. She said she'd been confused. She said she didn't realize how it looked. I let her finish. Then I said the truth in a tone that surprised even me with its gentleness. I told her it didn't matter how it looked. It mattered how it was. I told her she had treated my presence like a convenience and my silence like a feature. She started to cry and said she missed us. I said, "You miss the stability. You miss having someone to absorb your chaos while you chase intensity. You don't miss me as a person. You miss what I provided." She flinched the way people flinch when a mirror is held up without warning. She said she could change. I said, "Maybe you can. But I'm not staying to find out." I already did the part where I waited. My name was called inside the pharmacy. I nodded once, wished her well, and walked back in. I didn't look over my shoulder. Later that day, I realized I hadn't felt anger at all. I had felt clarity. That was new. The biggest lesson wasn't about her. It was about me. I learned that being calm is not the same as being compliant. I learned that love doesn't require you to reduce your needs into polite silence. I learned that respect isn't something you negotiate after the fact. And I learned this too. When someone asks you not to make things uncomfortable, pay attention. Sometimes they aren't asking for peace. They're asking for permission to ignore you. I no longer give that permission. After that, my life didn't become perfect. It became simpler. I learned to celebrate without needing an audience. I learned to rest without guilt. I learned to speak plainly without fear of being labeled difficult. Some nights I remembered the rooftop lights and felt a flicker of embarrassment for the version of me who was willing to wait at any table I was assigned. Then the feeling passed, replaced by gratitude that I didn't stay long enough to forget my own name. I started dating again eventually, slowly, not to fill space, but to share it. The first time someone asked what I needed and actually listened, it felt unfamiliar in the best way. I kept that memory as proof that healthy love isn't quiet because one person is shrinking. It's quiet because both people are safe. If there is a moral, it isn't to leave at the first mistake. It's to notice patterns and believe them. Mistakes can be repaired. Disrespect that is defended becomes a policy. I didn't leave to punish Marin. I left to stop punishing myself. And the strangest part is how peaceful it is when you finally stop negotiating your dignity. I don't tell this story for applause. I tell it because someone out there is sitting quietly, calling it maturity, while their life gets managed. If that's you, I hope you understand something sooner than I did. You're allowed to take up space in your own relationship. You're allowed to ask for respect without apologizing for the request. You're allowed to walk away without delivering a speech. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is leave without drama, because drama is the currency people use to keep you engaged. I didn't buy it anymore. I walked out with my calm intact, and I kept it. 2 weeks after I moved out, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was her sister. Her tone was polite but loaded, the way people speak when they have already decided you're guilty. She said Maren was struggling, that she wasn't sleeping, that she kept repeating the same question. How could he do this without talking first? I said I did talk for months. I just didn't talk loudly. Then I ended the call before it turned into court. A few days later, a coworker asked if I was okay because Maren had posted something vague online about betrayal and narcissists. I smiled and said I was fine, then muted her accounts without looking. It wasn't that I feared her words. I feared the way they could pull me into defending myself to people who didn't want the truth, only a side. At work, the promotion finally started to feel real. I took meetings with a steadier pulse. I spoke up more. It was strange how much energy I had been losing to a relationship that required constant translation. One evening, while unpacking a box in my new place, I found a receipt from the rooftop restaurant. The date printed on it made me pause. Not because I missed her, but because I couldn't believe how quickly my life had reorganized around a single decision. I remembered standing by the host stand, hearing the music through the glass, watching her laugh with someone else as if my presence were an accessory that could be set down. I used to wonder if I should have said something in that moment, if a speech would have made the ending cleaner. Now I know speeches are for people who expect negotiations. I wasn't negotiating. Months later, a mutual friend told me Maren kept saying she didn't think I'd actually leave. She assumed I'd cool off, return, and accept an apology delivered like a coupon. That sentence, "she didn't think I'd actually leave," explained everything. She had been treating my patience as a permanent resource. Once you recognize that, you can't unsee it. You start noticing the way certain people push boundaries like they're testing the material, assuming it won't tear. I also noticed my own habits. The way I used to apologize for taking time. The way I used to soften statements until they barely existed. I practiced being direct in small ways. I told a barista when my order was wrong without guilt. I told a friend I didn't want to go out and didn't invent an excuse. Each honest moment felt like returning to myself. Eventually, I dated someone new, not as a rebound, but as proof that I could choose again. The first time she asked what I wanted to do and meant it, I felt a strange urge to rush to agreement just to be easy. I caught myself and said, "I'll think about it." She nodded and smiled like that was normal. It was normal. I had simply forgotten. On a rainy Saturday, almost a year after the rooftop night, I walked past that same building and looked up at the lights. I didn't feel anger. I felt distance, like it belonged to someone else's life. I realized that the cleanest revenge isn't proving a point. It's building a life that doesn't require you to relive the argument. If I could speak to the earlier version of myself, the one praising his own silence, I would tell him this: calm is valuable, but only when it's chosen, not demanded. I would tell him that a partner who loves you doesn't ask you to shrink so their past can take up space. A partner doesn't treat your discomfort as inconvenience. And I would tell him that walking away without a scene isn't weakness. It's discipline. It's refusing to perform pain for an audience that won't help you heal. People sometimes ask if I regret not giving Maren another chance. I don't, because chances are meaningful only when the person receiving them understands why they're being offered. She didn't want understanding. She wanted the return of the role I played. Stable, quiet, forgiving, predictable. I'm no longer interested in being predictable for someone who confuses control with comfort. These days, when someone says, "Don't make this awkward," I hear the translation immediately. They mean don't disrupt the story I'm trying to tell. I choose my own story now. I choose my own table. And if I ever get up and leave again, it won't be because I'm angry. It will be because I'm sure. I started keeping my phone on loud again, not because I wanted noise, but because I wasn't afraid of it. In the past, every vibration felt like a test I could fail. I stopped scanning messages for hidden criticism. I answered people when I wanted to, not because I was trying to prevent disappointment. One night, my brother visited and asked how it ended. I told him the short version. He stared at me for a second and said, "You know what's wild? You look lighter, like your shoulders dropped an inch." That comment stayed with me. It made me realize how visible emotional weight becomes when it's carried for long enough. I tried therapy for a while, not because I thought I was broken, but because I wanted to understand why I had tolerated being managed. I learned that I was proud of being low maintenance because it made me feel safe from rejection. If I asked for little, I could be left for little. That logic worked in childhood. It doesn't work in adult love. I practiced asking for what I needed without rehearsing a justification. It felt uncomfortable at first, like stepping onto a floor you assumed would collapse. Then I discovered something simple. People who care don't punish you for having needs. They adjust, or they talk, or they admit they can't. They don't label you difficult for being human. Every so often, a memory would surface. Marin rolling her eyes when I asked who she was texting. Marin laughing at a joke that stung. Marin saying I should relax as if my feelings were a hobby I could quit. Instead of spiraling, I started treating those memories as evidence. Evidence that leaving wasn't impulsive, it was overdue. There was also relief in accepting that my calm had been weaponized. I had been praised for being steady because it made me easier to dismiss. That's the quiet trick some people learn. Compliment the restraint, then demand it. I stopped responding to that trick. On my next birthday, I went out with friends and didn't worry about whether my joy would be called too much. I laughed loudly. I told stories. I stayed out late. No one scolded me for taking up space. Later, walking home, I realized that love should feel like that. Freedom, not performance. Months after the pharmacy encounter, Marin sent one final email. No subject line, a few sentences about missing me, about growing, about wanting to meet for coffee. I read it once. I didn't feel tempted. I felt sorry for the version of her who believed access to me was something she could request like a service. I didn't reply. Silence isn't always avoidance. Sometimes it's a boundary. I deleted the email and went back to my day. It's strange how the mind tries to romanticize what it survives. People say she must have loved you in her own way. Maybe. But love that requires you to shrink isn't love I can live inside. If someone needs to put you in a corner so they can feel comfortable, they don't want a partner. They want furniture. I'm not furniture. The best part of leaving wasn't the absence of arguments. It was the absence of that constant low-grade self-doubt. I stopped asking, am I overreacting? I started asking, is this respectful? That single question changes everything. And if there's one thing I'd want anyone listening to remember, it's this. You don't have to explode to prove you matter. You can leave quietly, and your quiet can still be loud enough to save you.